Hey you, welcome back to the Scenic Route. I'm your host, Jennifer. And, well, I hate to break it to you. Well, you've been propagandized today. Is that even a word? Propagandized? I think so. I don't know. Well, but anyway, you have been probably in the last hour, maybe in the last fucking 5 minutes. And so have I, to be honest. And I'm not talking about some conspiracy theory or political ad or whatever. I'm talking about ideas that feel so obvious, so natural, so true that we would never think to question them. So by the end of this episode, you're going to see propaganda everywhere. So disclaimer, spoiler, whatever, in your morning routine, in the news, and how you think about work and what you consider normal. And honestly, you might not be able to unsee it, and that's a very fucking good thing. So we're ready to see the water you're swimming in. So let's go. There's a different way to think about mental health, and it starts with slowing down. Sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home, and that's exactly why we're taking the Scenic Route. Hi, I'm Jennifer Walter, host of the Scenic Route podcast. Think of me as your sociologist, sister in arms, and rebel with many causes. Together, we're blending critical thinking with compassion, mental health with a dash of rebellion, and personal healing with collective change. We're trading perfectionism for possibility and toxic positivity for messy growth. Each week, we're exploring the path to better mental health and social transformation. And yes, by the way, pretty crystals are totally optional. You ready to take the scenic route? Let's walk this path together. Okay. Like, what even is propaganda? Usually people have mental images of World War II posters and Leni Riefenstahl movies and angry men shouting, which is also true. Or we think about lies, manipulations, but that's all not the heart of it. We have to look at Jacques Ellul, who wrote a book on propaganda in the 60s, and his core statement in this book was propaganda isn't about changing your mind. It's about reinforcing what you already believe and setting the frame for what feels normal. And that's a very crucial part. Like, every time you're in an argument with someone who has like a completely different view than you have, you're not going to change their minds. So we're not going to, that's just not how we work. It's reinforcing what at some part you already believe, have a bit of tiny truth maybe, and then get a hook in it. So one thing at a time. So, okay, reinforcing. Cool. How does this work in society? Here we have to look at the work of Antonio Gramsci. He called, I guess, his idea of cultural hegemony. Dominant groups maintain power by making their worldview seem like common sense. That's just how things are. And of course, dominant groups are most likely white men. So this is just how things are. You know how they've always been this way. So the best propaganda isn't loud and flashy, although that seems to be working quite well for some presidents. It's quiet, repetitive, dare I say boring, right? Because it needs to blend into the backgrounds of our lives until we forget that it's there. Until we forget that there's actually nothing normal about any of this. So, for example, the American dream. Okay, like I'm not an American, but U.S. cultural hegemony through movies and books and TV series and whatnot. The whole idea of work hard, achieve anything has rippled out. And notice the frame here. It's not success is good or bad, right? But it's often this success is an individual achievement. I work hard, so I achieve it, regardless of what contributing factors like my sex, my race, all the public goods I used to get my success. And the same time, the same coin, just the back side of it is failure is individual failing. If you fail, it's your responsibility. It's not that, I don't know, there should be a society, like we are living in a society and society should like support you. Oh, dare, God forbid. So the framing is or looks at that we stop asking, well, what if the system is rigged? what if some people start miles ahead than I did, who like work hard, achieve anything? Does this go for everyone? Does this go for people of color, for women, for marginalized people? Like, I don't think so. There we go. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Or like someone always dumping on the US, like here in Europe, we all also have this whole work-life balance craze, right? And it's always framed as, well, you need better boundaries. Switch off your phone. Up Pomodoro the shit out of your day. Let's do like a workplace initiative to build resilience. And instead, we're never asking the question, well, why don't we actually know? Well, why do we need to be more resilient in the workplace? Why is that? Why do we need better work boundaries? So this all becomes like an individual problem, right? Like people have to make sure they have good boundaries. And it's not about companies not ringing their employees at fucking 10 o'clock at night or their superiors. So burnout as well, then in consequence becomes a personal time management failure and not a structural one. And it's very much a structural one. But we have past episodes on that. So go back after this one. Propaganda as a concept makes you forget that there were other ways to look at it or to think at all. It narrows the frame and it makes certain ideas invisible and it turns ideology, any kind, into reality. And we're going to look at that later on in the episode with the Overton window. But now we have to look at, okay, but how does propaganda actually work? So it's not just flashy billboards and shouting cheetahs. It's boils down to three mechanisms: omission and normalization, repetition. Again, it's not the glossy spectacle. We have a German saying that goes, der Tropfen hüllt den Stein. I don't know, constant dripping wears away the stone, follows out the stone. Yeah, something along those lines. That's exactly what we mean with repetition. Mechanism one of propaganda is repetition. It's just constantly the same. The mill is going and running and running and running. It's just always the same fucking shit. In the 1920s, an American journalist called Walter Lippmann wrote a book called Public Opinion, where he introduced this idea that public opinion isn't some organic thing that bubbles up from the people, but it's actually manufactured by those who control media and information. And then in the 80s, we had Chomsky and Herman, who wrote Manufacturing Consent, where they showed exactly how this manufacturing happens. Disclaimer, yes, Chomsky's later affiliation with Epstein are beyond horrendous, unethically, deeply disturbing affiliations with Epstein. So they identified 5 filters that kind of media passes through. Ownership, like who owns the media company? Like think about why billionaires are buying up newspapers, like Jeff Bezos, Washington Post, Elon Musk, Twitter. Like it's not a conspiracy, it's not rocket science. The person who signs the paycheck influences what gets covered and how it gets covered, and especially how it gets covered. Like kind of like the whole you don't bite the hand that feeds you kind of thing. Advertising is another. Media needs advertisers to survive. So stories that might upset major advertisers, you probably get buried. Sourcing is a big one. Like who gets quoted as an expert? It's usually people from institutions of power, and rarely voices of marginalized people. With flack, negative responses that discipline the media when they step out of line. No negative responses do you expect? Well, if you don't get a smack, then you will not stop. And just kind of like dominant ideology, what worldview is considered sensible. And all these kind of like shape what gets reported and how it gets reported on. So these filters ensure certain narratives get repeated, while others kind of like just completely disappear. And again, it's the point is the propaganda doesn't need to be exciting or fresh or new. It just needs to be constant. Right? I mean, how many times in different iterations have you heard hard work pays off? It doesn't need to be true. It doesn't need to be flashy. It's trashy. It doesn't need to be flashy. It just gets repeated until it feels true. Second mechanism is omission. And that's a big one, right? what stories aren't told when I tell the story in a certain way? What questions aren't asked? I think here it's important to talk about Stuart Hall and his work. He spent years studying how media actually creates meaning. And one of his big insights was that the frame determines what we can't even see. So if the frame is set in a very particular way, certain possibilities become visible and others literally become invisible. Kind of like, I don't know, when you're a chef and you're putting out the menu of your restaurant, what you put on becomes visible and others becomes literally invisible. Or like a good example is crime coverage. It's almost always framed as individual moral failing. And again, that only works because there is like a really tiny grain of truth in that. But what stories aren't told? It's usually the stories of poverty, lack of education, systemic racism, over policing, or look at how on war crimes or genocides. I mean, how many times have we read the headline 100 people killed in Gaza? Well, killed by whom? People don't just get killed. Someone actively kills them. But the passive voice erases agency, erases responsibility. It makes violence sounds like a natural disaster, a consequence of some kind, like something that just happens and we can't do anything about it, rather than something people with power choose to do. Now, with the Epstein files, right? And the whole media report on sexual abuse in general, like relationships with underage women. Stop the fuck! Cut it out! We have a word for underage women and it's girls. So the language makes it sound like, I don't know, a consensual relationship of sorts. Underage women. What the holy fuck? What's omitted? That these are children. That this is rape. The propaganda is also in what they say, but we need to be very, very conscious of the language that obscures what actually is happening. Mechanism 3, normalization. Here we have to draw on Michel Foucault's work. He was a French philosopher who spent his career studying how power actually works in society. His key insight was power doesn't just operate through force or laws. It operates through creating what we think of as normal. So once something becomes normalized, it's incredibly hard to challenge. And successfully gets challenged over decades, generations. And it's not because anyone is kind of like forcing you with a gun to your head, but because it just feels like this is just how things are. Things have always been this way. For example, a great one, I think, is always kind of like hustle culture. How dare you to be so frivolous that you have a hobby? So if you have a hobby, you better make sure it's monetized, because otherwise, how fucking dare you? Or rest must be earned. Excuse me, no, rest is just like a natural part of our, like, how bodies work. Thank you very much. Or, oh, that's always my personal favorite. Your worth is tied to your output. Huh. Okay, my worth is tied to how much I can put into this system. Sure, how much can be extracted of me. Love it. Love this for us. And no one is like literally, figuratively holding a gun to your head. The killer is like, we are actually holding our own gun to our own head with that. But see, these ideas feel true because they've been repeated and embedded and normalized over and over again. And the even absolute fucking cherry on top is that the most effective propaganda makes you believe you arrived at these conclusions yourself, that you're some kind of grand thinker who did something very logically and rational and realistic and came to this conclusion that your worth is tied to your output, so you better work more, work harder, and with the consequences. So we've talked about how propaganda works through repetition, omission, and normalization, 3 mechanisms. But here it gets kind of really interesting. And we're circling back to what we said before about kind of like the frame of what gets talked about. It's the core, the propaganda doesn't just influence what you think. It determines what's even thinkable in the first place. Here we have to draw on a concept called the Overton window, named after a policy analyst, Joseph Overton. It's the range of ideas that are considered acceptable in public discourse at any given time. And if you're talking about something outside the Overton window, you're a pariah and you're like, you're loony and you're crazy and whatever. So what does this mean? Practical example, US presidential debates. So you have two people arguing about market regulations, how much we should regulate markets. Like one is like 45 and the other is like 47% we should regulate. But the question is not, well, whether markets should be the primary way we organize society. Like that would be an interesting thing to talk about that. But no, that's not that. No, we cannot. No, we cannot talk about this. It's not inside the Overton window. Or we talk about how much percentage of BIP should be spent on military spending. We're not talking about whether current spending levels make sense at all, or if we just should not do any military spending. Oh, God forbid. Certain ideas, universal healthcare is a good example. Basic income, good example. Cutting military spending in half or something like that. They get labeled as extreme or unrealistic. And not because they're logically impossible. Or another great example, just erasing national borders. I mean, they're not logically impossible. You can do that. You can cut military spending. You can say, well, we introduce universal basic income. They're logically very much possible. So they're not extreme or unrealistic because of that, but because they fall outside the window of what's considered acceptable to even discuss. And God forbid, I think episode 91 of the Senior Ground, I talked about nationalism. I mean, the comments I got for this episode, like, how dare you even nation states are super. I'm like, are you for real? Sure, yes. Could we actually discuss about other ways how we could organize things? No. Okay, cool. Let's move on. And again, how is that window maintained? Through the three mechanisms we just talked about: repetition, omission, normalization. So through propaganda. And I think here we don't need to, I just really want to mention this because it has been bugging me forever. That both sides, okay? So this is the perfect example of how this works. The both sides framing we hear all the fucking time. There are good people on both sides. Oh, the truth is in the middle. We need to hear both perspectives. And yes, look, I mean, I'm all for nuance, right? But the both sides framing becomes propaganda in the very second when it creates false equivalencies. For example, climate change, very good example. For years, media gave equal time to climate scientists and climate deniers. That's even happening to this fucking day, and I'm sick of it. So framing this as a debate, all the while scientific consensus was and is overwhelming. We know climate change is happening. We know climate change is real. So that whole setup of climate scientists versus climate deniers and having equal airtime, that's not neutral. That's not both sides. It's propaganda. It normalizes the idea that this climate change is a question with two equally valid answers. That it's not. One is an opinion at best. Shitty one at that, but anyway. Okay, the point, neutrality itself can be propaganda. When you frame something as balanced, you're reinforcing the status quo, making the current arrangements seem like the natural center, and anything else is deviation. Yes, side eye for those listening. Where we feel is the most, or I feel the most, gender roles. Of course, gender roles. If you play bingo, it's just like, how long did Chen mentions gender roles? Women still do most emotional labor and household work and management, even when working full time. We know this. Science tells us that. Surveys, all that. That's not enforced by law. Like, there's no law who says we must so. Well, there isn't yet. So I don't want to give any policymakers the wrong ideas here. But like, it's just enforced by normalization. That's just what women do. Women are caring. Women are nurturing. And yeah, we are. But not the point. So think about the whole trad-wife thing. It's not presented as propaganda. It's presented as personal choice, an aesthetic, a return to authenticity, whatever the fuck that means. But the frame, again, is interesting. So modern feminism has made women miserable. Like, they look haggard and they feel miserable. Their husbands are not having enough sex. So traditional gender roles are natural and fulfilling. The nuclear family is the only real path to happiness. And of course, like, the only natural thing anyway. Because, I mean, gender is natural anyway, like, whatever. And there are just two genders anyway, so why bother? Again, when submitted that this tradition is actually a very specific kind of 1950s and not a timeless truth at all, that it requires very much economic privilege most people don't have. It takes economic privilege to have one partner at home. And then that partner also needs a lot of trust or trust funds to know that they will not end up in poverty when they're old and their partner dumps them. But anyway, personal choice, people. Again, it's not timeless truth, right? It frames structural problems. Unaffordable childcare, lack of parental leave, wage stagnation, like all these things. All these structural problems are framed as like personal lifestyle choices. And it's like, no. So the propaganda is not, just be a housewife, right? It's the framing that kind of like makes questioning traditional gender roles seems like you're against nature. Because women are naturally nurturing and thus need to take care of house and home and children. I did not get that memo. Again, the scary part, once something becomes normal, questioning makes you seem extreme. Push back on hustle culture, you're just a lazy cunt. Questioning capitalism, you're just like one teeny tiny left-wing unrealistic snowflake, aren't you? Challenging traditional gender roles, radical. How dare she? Or how dare they? See what I did there? So the propaganda isn't just in the message we receive, and in the very frame that determines what counts as reasonable in the first place. So now we're at the point of like, okay, I got it. Thanks very much. But now what the fuck do we do? And first we have to be very honest with ourselves. We're not immune to propaganda. You are not. I am not. We're not. We're human. We live in this culture, society, cesspool, pick one. But we can develop, and we should. We must, what Paulo Freire, I think that's how to pronounce it, called critical consciousness, the ability to see contradictions and take action. We have five tools that are at our disposal, and we must use them. One is name the frame. Ask, what is this assuming? What worldview does it take for granted? So the frame's kind of like retirement, security is individual responsibility. And yes, that again, it only holds true because there's like a tiny seed of truth in there. But we're not talking about stagnant wages, pension decline, any of these things. So what is this assuming? What worldview does it take for granted? Follow the omission. We have to ask what's not being said. And then my favorite question of all, who benefits? Who benefits from this thing not being said? From this thing being left out? Who benefits from that? Another two, we have to seek counter narratives. We actively have to seek perspectives that challenge common sense. Read, people. Read more. Read books. Just read. Listen to different experiences. And this isn't kind of like the both sides bullshit. It's seeing what kind of dominant discourse obscures. We have to just read. We have to read more books. Seriously, we have to. And crucial one, we have to sit with the discomfort. When something feels obviously true, logically true, naturally true, get curious about why. Why is that? Is it your own privilege that makes you think so? The most obvious stuff is what we're least likely to question. And that process of questioning, that creates discomfort. Again, that discomfort is where the work happens, where you sit with it and you wade through the discomfort, realizing, okay, the discomfort, like where it comes from your own privileges, and then kind of like work with that. And again, I think lastly, we're not above it. We're all subject to propaganda, including you, me, even the fucking smartest people you know. And so the question isn't whether you're influenced, the question is whether you're aware. And I think humility is the very beginning of developing critical consciousness. Propaganda isn't evil or good. I think it doesn't operate in those terms. It's a tool, it's a social force. It's how culture works, how norms get established, how power gets exercised. And it could go in either way. And right now we have too much of the wrong way. But the goal isn't purity, being completely free from ideology. I don't think that's possible. But we have to become more aware. We have to build a capacity to see the frame, to be aware, to see the frame, to notice when something is presented as invitable and to ask, is it though? Is it really? Bitch, you sure? Like when we can see the frame, we can name it, we can step outside of it, even if it's just for a moment, and like look at it from a distance and be like, huh. And then we remember that there are other ways to think, other ways to live, other ways to organize the world. So for this week, notice when something feels obvious or just how things are and get curious. Like ask who benefits from this being normal? Who benefits from me naturally being the nurturer in the family? Who benefits from like me like answering my boss's email at 10 o'clock at night? What alternatives am I not seeing? Like, why do I see, that goes back to my episode of nationalism. Like, if you look at the weather report, why are they like state or country border on the weather map? The weather doesn't really care about it. And again, be gentle with yourself. The work is hard and you're doing the work while you're swimming in this cesspool. So again, I've mentioned it before, if you want to go deeper on some of how this specific mechanism works in a specific context, check out episode 91 on nationalism. Really great example of propaganda in action. So that's the scenic route for this week. No shortcuts to the truth, but slowing down enough to see what's going on and find time to smell roses and enjoy the view. So thanks for being here. Share this with someone who might need to hear it, and see you next episode.
And just like that, we've reached the end of another journey together on the Scenic Route podcast. Thank you for spending time with us. Curious for more stories or in search of the resources mentioned in today's episode? Visit us at scenicroutepodcast.com for everything you need. And if you're ready to embrace your scenic route, I've got something special for you. Step off the beaten path with my Scenic Route affirmation card deck. It's crafted for those moments when you're seeking courage, yearning to trust your inner voice, and eager to carve out a path authentically, unmistakably yours. Pick your Scenic Route affirmation today and let it support you. Excited about where your journey might lead? I certainly am. Remember, the Scenic Route is not just about the destination, but the experiences, learnings, and joy we discover along the way. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on the Scenic Route again.